next speaker, independent MP now, doing a roaring train at the back of the room with his book signing. If you haven't yet bought the book, please do, because they're selling fast. I think he's gone for more supplies. Really, really delighted to introduce Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank all those that have put together and organised this amazing anti-war assembly, because it's so necessary, so timely and so valuable. And everyone here will remember the arguments they heard, will remember the messages they got, and feel strengthened and empowered by being here. Because the media constantly denigrate everything we say, assume we are some utterly irrelevant tiny minority who just happen to walk around the streets on Saturday afternoons, completely ignoring the majority opinion of people, which is there should not be bombardment of Gaza and Palestine, that there should be peace in Ukraine, that we should not be spending yet more money on arms and weapons of mass destruction in this country. But all that argument is completely ignored by our media, and the agenda that's set in debate on particularly the BBC Radio 4 Today programme is one that completely ignores the whole arguments for peace. And I asked John Healey in Parliament last week what actions the Ministry of Defence was taking to promote the cessation of wars and peace around the world. There was a sort of deathly silence throughout the whole chamber. Did he really just use the word peace? Did he really say peace? And Healey told me that we couldn't wish war away, and that's why we're spending more on having more wars. Tomorrow I've got another question for him, saying what does he think the effects of a nuclear war would be on the planet? I think it's a fair question, actually. It's extremely fair and totally logical question to ask, so that's what he's got coming up tomorrow. And so we have to be strong, and we have to be determined, and we have to be inclusive of expanding the voice for peace. The massive demonstrations we've had in support of the Palestinian people over the past year have shown to me, and to all of you here as well, I'm sure, that there is a whole demographic of people who come from a pretty broad spectrum of opinion on other issues, that come from all parts of the UK, who are actually utterly united on wanting to be in a country that's promoting and arguing for peace, rather than a country that is determined to go to war all the time. And I found in the recent election campaign in July, and I want to say a personal thank you to all those people that came to Islington North to help in that amazing campaign and get the result that we did, that there is a thirst for an alternative voice, and the five of us in our Independent Alliance group of MPs are doing everything we can, particularly to raise issues of Palestine and peace in Parliament all the time. And so it is also challenging a number of other things. The arms trade is massive, its lobbying power is massive. Global expenditure on arms is now $2.4 trillion, almost $1 trillion of which is spent by the United States, the rest by the rest of the world. Arms expenditure is going up. NATO is requiring all member states to increase their expenditure to 2.5% of GDP, which means in the case of Britain it will be around another £30 billion per year by the end of this decade. And if anyone's quick and good at maths, that works out at about £700 million a week more on arms by the end of this decade. Think of the schools you could build, the hospitals you could build, the nurses you could employ, the doctors you could train, the students you could give free education to, the children that would not be living in hunger and poverty because of the two-child benefit, the food banks that would become redundant because people would have enough money to buy their own food. Think of all those alternatives. But no, The only area of guaranteed increase in government expenditure from the budget is the defence budget, to go up by this massive amount. And so I think these things have to be said and have to be challenged. And so I've found the book that Lindsay and I and Andrew Fancy and others have written on the monstrous anger of the guns. We've been doing events all over the country about it, bringing along an amazing cross-section of people who ask sometimes tough but very good questions and take part in that debate. I'd be grateful for your feedback on the book, because we want it to be a living book, and we're going to do another one next year based on the feedback and the experience from these events, because it's a book that is challenging the narrative laid down by our mainstream media and all of the mainstream political parties that somehow or other the future of this country is entirely dependent on a global role, spending more and more on weapons of mass destruction and arms in general, and somehow or other that's going to make people better off, and that is then accompanied by all sorts of nationalist rhetoric. And so it is our voice for peace. What's happening in Gaza, what's happening in Lebanon, is beyond disgraceful and beyond disgusting. I was looking at a map this morning of Israel's bombardment in Lebanon. It goes way beyond southern Lebanon and the southern suburbs of Beirut. It's in central Beirut, and it's in the northern parts of Lebanon. Why? Because they're choosing hospitals and medical centres to bomb and destroy. So there'll be no medical service worth speaking of for the people of Lebanon any more than there is now in Gaza. This destruction of all the vital services to maintain human life is carrying on with weapons supplied by the US, delivered via the British base in Akrotiri, and British complicity in it by the manufacturing of F-35 jets. There's got to be an arms embargo on Israel. There's got to be an end to the arms trade with Israel. And that is the message we've been putting forward, and we'll keep on and on putting that forward. And the point that all the speakers have made is that it might seem, and it often is, extremely frustrating to be having demonstrations and marches all over the country, and I've been on pretty well all of them in all parts of the country. It does make a difference. It does bring people out. It does inspire people to do more. They are getting bigger. There's more and more people involved. But crucially, it gives some little bit of hope and solidarity for people on the West Bank, in Gaza, in the refugee camps, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Jordan, and all over the region. It gives them some sense that there is real solidarity around the world. And I think we should pay tribute to those people in the United States that managed to ensure that Gaza was raised during the presidential election, that did occupy the campuses around the United States. And despite the lack of any meaningful feedback from the leadership of either Republican or Democratic parties, they nevertheless did get that very strong message across. They go, to me, in the great tradition of the American peace protests against the Vietnam War. Those people that protested to bring about the civil rights movement in the 1950s and 1960s. That's the American tradition that I admire. That's the American tradition that we need greater solidarity with, because there's going to be huge campaigns and battles to come over the next few years. I also just want to say this, that sadly, what's happening in Gaza is not the only war in the world. There is the devastation that's going on in Ukraine, where conscripted soldiers in Ukraine are killing conscripted soldiers from Russia, and the destruction goes on, and the death rate goes on, and the arms continue to pour in. There's got to be an end to the war in Ukraine. It's got to be done by diplomacy. It's got to be done by negotiation. The UN failed to do it. The European Union failed to do it. Well done, the Latin American presidents and the African Union, for at least trying to negotiate some kind of cessation of that conflict and eventually some sort of peace process. We can't miss it or walk away from it. If we're against wars, we're also against that war in Ukraine, because we don't want to see any more lives lost anywhere, be it in Russia or in Ukraine. That's not an endorsement of the Russian invasion, by the way. in case anyone from the Daily Mail or the Daily Express is here today. There are other wars that are barely mentioned, actually. The Sudan, where tens of thousands are being killed all the time. The weapons are flowing in, the war goes on, the people suffer, and they then are forced to migrate to neighbouring countries. And there are upwards of 1 million refugees from the Sudan in the neighbouring countries. And so when the media in Europe complain about refugees coming into Europe, they should think for a moment of the effect of wars in Africa and the massive number of refugees that go into countries that have no facilities to process them, deal with them or support them, but nevertheless welcome them. There are at least 1 million in Egypt, as well as in Ethiopia, Eritrea and many other countries all across Africa. And the war that is never ever mentioned is the war in the Congo. The war in the Congo that's gone on and on for decades and decades, and that is a war funded by the mining companies in order to exploit cobalt particularly, but also other minerals as well. And what we need is more understanding of how these conflicts came about and the history that goes with it. And so when we've produced this book on the monstrous anger of the guns, we've also produced, as some of you have bought copies today, Poetry for the Many book. And again, that's brought a lot of people together to talk about issues of morality, inspiration, and hope. What we need is a greater attention by all of us on education and the history that goes with it. I've been told I've got a very short time left, so I'll finish with this. Anti-colonial education and challenging the curriculum is something very, very important, because in a child's mind, their attitude to the rest of the world often comes from their first ideas of history, which they pick up in primary school rather than in secondary school. We need to think very carefully about how we present concepts of global history and global development that have a respect for all peoples all around the world, rather than the assumption that every technological advance that ever happened anywhere in the world came from Europe or the United States, and the rest of the world should understand it. We need a greater sense of global understanding and global unity. Last point, if you can carefully stop me if I go on any longer, I'll just say this. Security. Is security the ability to destroy your neighbour, to destroy the whole planet through nuclear weapons? Or is security to know your children will go to school, they will get food, they will get clean water, and you will be looked after when you're unable to fend for yourself in later years of life? Is real security when we protect the environment or we destroy the environment? Is real security spending a massive amount of our resources on weapons that can only destroy and kill people? Or is security something more tangible, which is to give people a sense of hope and life opportunities? The direction that Europe and this country is going in is one of reasserting a global role, reasserting global involvement through military means. We need to challenge that. We need to challenge that on the basis of the kind of world that we want to live in. The 70 million people who are refugees don't come from nowhere. The majority come from countries where there have been wars promoted by the United States and much of Europe. If we want a secure, peaceful world with real security for the people of this planet, then we're not going to achieve it by increasing arms expenditure. We're only going to achieve it by investment in improving people's living standards and, above all, protecting our natural world and our environment. Our message is one that actually unites millions of people and provides real hope. So stand up for the people of Gaza and Palestine. Stand up for the voice for peace all around the world. Thank you.